So let's start off with Netanyahu and what is going on, what he said. So the protests, nice to see you guys showed up. There was a lot of people out there for the protests. You can see this is the night before. They were outside of the Watergate Hotel, which is where Netanyahu was staying, and making a lot of ruckus and noise and trying to keep him up so that he wouldn't be so refreshed for his speech today. The protesters apparently were able to get into the hotel and spread maggots and mealworms around all over the place. As you can see there, really gross. The hotel has now said that the place is cleaned up and sanitized, but this is something that the protesters did. Let's go ahead and fast forward through some of this. We've got a lot of the big showing of the protesters that were out during the day. You can see that there was a lot of people. So quite a few people showed up for these various different protests. They had a stage. There's even a giant march that really kind of showed even more so. Let's kind of get to that so we can show you guys how great these protests were. So many of you showed up, which is just really, Netanyahu said during his address, there's not very many out there, but look at this. That's not very many, according to Netanyahu. That's a lot of protesters. He's used to it. Israelis have been protesting him for months. Swarms of Israelis, thousands and thousands of thousands have been also protesting Netanyahu. So I guess he's used to it. So to him, it's not that many, whatever, just some radical protesters out there. Here in the United States, he can call them anti-Semitic or something. He can't really get away with that in Israel when it's a bunch of Jews that are Israeli Jews who are out there protesting him. But nonetheless, let's get to some of his speech. So he said three things in here that were the most striking, in my opinion. The first one, he talks about food and food insecurity. So as you know, the ICJ has ruled that Israel is using food as a weapon. And there's been a lot of discussion about the humanitarian crisis, the starvation that is happening in Gaza. Let's hear what Netanyahu has to say about the food crisis.
And don't be fooled when the blood libels against the Jewish state come from people who wear fancy silk robes and speak in lofty tones about law and justice. Here's a case in point. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense. It's a complete fabrication. Israel has enabled more than 40,000 aid trucks to enter Gaza. That's 500,000 tons of food. And that's more than 3,000 calories for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. If there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, it's because Hamas is stealing it.
Okay, so I had to check on this one a little bit. So first I had to do some math and find out if he meant, because it was unclear in his speech, did he mean 3,000 calories total per person? So that would be like 10 calories a day per person, or does he mean 3,000 calories per day per person? And it is actually 3,000 calories per day per person that has been entering into Gaza. So then doing a little bit more research, finding out why is it people are starving if that much food is getting into the strip. And what experts are saying, the reason is that you can have a bunch of food enter into a country or into a region, but that doesn't mean that the distribution of the food is actually happening. The issue is that Israel has blown up all of the infrastructure. Israel is blocking roads. Israel is so you can make the claim it's like a half truth. He's saying we've allowed this many trucks to enter Gaza. Okay, great. But the people, where are they? Where are the people? Where are you allowing the food trucks to get in? Are you allowing then a distribution of that food? I mean, what does it matter to me? Here I am. I live in Los Angeles. What does it matter to me if the food arrives in New York or in Florida and then somebody? Well, there's enough food, 3,000 calories a day for Kim to eat, but it's all the way in Florida. Let's say it's somewhere totally unattainable for me. What does it matter that the food has been allowed into the country if I can't actually access it? So as you know, during the COVID pandemic, distribution is a big thing, right? We saw the breakdown of the supply chain. So that supply chain matters. And what the groups are saying is that Israel is allowing these aid trucks to come in, but it's all for show. that they're still not allowing the distribution of that aid. And that's what matters. So the people are still starving. The vast majority of people in Gaza are dealing with food insecurity. They can't get to the food that Israel is supposedly allowing in to Gaza. So that's a point to make. Let's go ahead and go on to his next point. He actually says that nearly no civilians, next to no civilians, have been killed since the invasion in Rafah. Watch this.
That's why, despite all the lies you've heard, the war in Gaza has one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants casualties in the history of urban warfare. And you want to know where it's lowest in Gaza? It's lowest in Rafah. In Rafah. Remember what so many people said? If Israel goes into Rafah, there'll be thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of civilians killed. Well, last week, I went into Rafah. I visited our troops as they finished fighting Hamas's remaining terrorist battalions. I asked the commander there, how many terrorists did you take out in Rafah? He gave me an exact number, 1,203. I asked him, how many civilians were killed? He said, Prime Minister, practically none, with the exception of a single incident where shrapnel from a bomb hit a Hamas weapons depot and unintentionally killed 24 people. The answer is practically none. You want to know why? Because Israel got the civilians out of harm's way, something people said we could never do, but we did it.
Okay. One thing that he mentioned before that, before the clip that I played for you, he actually talks about John Spencer from the Modern Urban Warfare Institute at West Point. We had him on the show last week, actually, and I mentioned in that show that he's somebody that Netanyahu talks about, somebody that RFK Jr. talks about, and during this congressional joint session, Netanyahu brought up John quite a bit. And he's saying, look, John says that we're not killing any civilians, and so therefore we're not killing civilians. I encourage you to watch that episode. One thing about it, it wasn't meant to be a debate. So some people were giving feedback of, well, you could have gone harder after him. You could have just, disputed him on this, that, and the other. The point of having these conversations isn't to have a debate, but to actually just listen to them and hear them out. And then we can decide whether or not we have changed our minds and whether or not we agree. The fact is, nobody watched that episode and thought, wow, John's right. I've changed my mind now. Israel's not committing a genocide and they're not targeting civilians. So I encourage you to watch it and just hear what the other side has to say about what they're doing to protect civilian life. So Netanyahu is saying that no civilians have been killed. One of the issues with Israelis is that they claim that everybody is a combatant. So how do they categorize who's a combatant and who is a civilian? That is something that they can't even really give a clear answer to that, because they kind of think, when you ask them about children or women, they'll say, well, they all are. They'll indicate in one way or another that they all are. But let's look at the actual numbers. So he says practically no civilians have been killed since their invasion into Rafah. One thing is for certain, which is that they haven't been given the 2,000-pound dumb bombs. So they're not able to level the place like they were northern Gaza as effectively. They are still doing a huge amount of damage in Rafah. Rafah is a wasteland, but they're not able to do it with the big bombs that end up burying civilians under the rubble. But nonetheless, here's some of the civilians who've been killed just in Rafah. After the initial Israeli strikes, the Kuwaiti hospital in Rafah reportedly received 27 dead and 150 wounded people. Israeli media reported that more than 30 people had died in the airstrikes. Medics reported 16 people killed in 2 airstrikes, including 9 from one family and 7 from another. CNN reported that the dead, 6 were women and 9 were children. So when he says nearly no civilians, are women and children civilians? Al Jazeera English reported the nonstop bombing of residential houses. By June of 2024, rescue teams were reportedly unable to reach wounded people in Rafah. So if you can't reach the dead, I guess you don't count them. More than 35 civilians were killed and nearly 130 people were injured on 7th of May. 19 people, including 5 children and women, were killed on 8th of May. 15 civilians were killed and 5 injured on the 9th of May. On the 10th of May, 1 Israeli civilian was injured by Hamas rocket fire from central Gaza and Rafah. 1 Palestinian was killed and 1 child injured. 9 civilians were killed on the 11th of May. I've just rattled off a bunch of civilians that have been killed from the 7th to the 11th of May. Multiple civilians and a UN staff member were killed in intensified airstrikes on the 13th of May. 5 civilians were killed on the 15th of May. 4 civilians were killed in central Rafah on the 16th of May. 3 civilians were killed on the 18th of May. 9 people were killed on the 19th of May, including 6 children and 2 women. 24 people were killed on the 20th of May, including 16 children and 6 women. 18 people were killed on the 21st of May. 13 people were killed on the 48 hours after the 24th of May ICJ ruling. On the 26th of May, Israel bombed a displacement camp in Rafah, reportedly killing 35 to 45 people and wounding 60 while targeting 2 Hamas commanders. And Israel claimed that this was it was the shrapnel. And on May 30th, Save the Children stated that 66 people had been killed in safe zones over a 4-day period. So what is he talking about? That's just May. That's just May. So what is he talking about? No civilians have been killed. I just rattled off a bunch of civilians who've been killed. But again, if you're not going to categorize them as civilians, if you're going to say, well, and if we can't find the bodies because they're under rubble, then they don't count yet. If we can't identify them, there's no death certificate. Plenty of people there's a lot of civilians who are dying in Rafah. There are fewer dying in Rafah than what has gone on in the northern part of Gaza. That is because the world woke up to what Israel was doing, extremely shocked, and limited it. So Israel has had no choice but to limit their engagement in Rafah. Also because the world is not okay with them trying to expel these people in Egypt, which is what their original plan was. They moved everybody to the south of Gaza. They systemically did that by bombing the north and bombing it until they kind of slowly moved everybody to the south. And they were hoping that the world would put pressure on Egypt to open up their gates and let all the people in so they could clear the land of the Palestinians. And that's not what's going on. So they have to be more careful because the world is watching. Thank God the world is finally watching because it is saving lives. But that is why we have to put more pressure on Israel. Okay, one last clip I want to play for you guys. Here is Netanyahu. The reports were, and one of the reasons why I watched this address at all was because the reports were that he would come out with a plan for the day after the war, something he hasn't done up until today. Let's hear what he says this grand plan is. Watch this.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there to prevent the resurgence of terror, to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. That's not too much to ask. It's a fundamental thing that we have a right to demand and to receive. A new generation of Palestinians must no longer be taught to hate Jews, but rather to live in peace with us. Those twin words, demilitarization and de-radicalization, those two concepts were applied to Germany and Japan after World War II, and that led to decades of peace, prosperity, and security. Following our victory, with the help of regional partners, the demilitarization and de-radicalization of Gaza can also lead to a future of security, prosperity, and peace. That's my vision for Gaza.
I mean, okay, let's see if this is just lip service or what. Look, I don't have any problem with demilitarizing and de-radicalizing. The de-radicalization, though, needs to happen inside of Israel. Israel is highly radicalized. You're dealing with two groups of people who have hated, I don't want to get into the why. Some's legitimate, some isn't legitimate on both sides, I would say, but there's a lot of anger and resentment and hostility between these two groups of people. Whichever side you think is right or wrong on that, it kind of doesn't matter. It's that hatred and that anger is there. So what do you do about it? How do you get these two groups of people to live together? Well, where that then starts to matter, the history and why, is when what the solution is. And if you think the solution is that the Palestinians just have to de-radicalize and the Israelis don't, and that the Palestinians just have to kind of suck it up and live the way the Israelis want them to live as second-class citizens, well, that's not a working solution. What has to happen, if he's going to say, look, we want to de-radicalize and demilitarize them the same way we did to Germany and Japan, fine. But you have to do it exactly like that. And you know what that means? That means building up. We built up Germany and Japan. They're extremely prosperous nations today. And guess what? Their citizens have full rights. Full rights. There's no separation between groups of people. If you go to Germany today, Jews have the same rights as the Christian Germans. Jewish Germans and Christian Germans and Muslim Germans all live with the exact same rights in Germany. So if he's proposing that, if he's saying, look, we just want to de-radicalize them and demilitarize them so that they'll live with us in peace and we will be equals and we will live together and we will be prosperous because we will build them up, then great. But I have a feeling that is not what he means. I don't think he means that at all. And I think the radicals inside of his cabinet don't mean that either. They are looking to keep the Palestinians. What they want to do is de-radicalize and demilitarize, but continue to subjugate and continue to oppress. And to tell the Palestinian people, look, you just have to accept being a second-class citizen without rights. You just have to accept it. Stop being hostile about it. Stop fighting me over it. You're less than. You are 3/5 a person. Get it? Accept it. If that's their plan, that's not going to work. Nobody's going to accept long-term being 3/5 a person. And they shouldn't. And that is where Israel has gone wrong all of these decades, is that if you turn people into less than humans, you're bound to have a repeat of October 7th. That is what happens. War will break out. Violence will break out. People will break out. They will not be subjugated like that. So we'll see. We'll see what Netanyahu means about that. He says he doesn't have any plans to resettle Gaza. He says that he just wants them to live in peace and next to them in prosperity. But if that means it's like what slave owners, how they justified slavery. They'd say, but we're good to them. Why would they want their freedom? We're good to them. Their life is good the way it is. With what I've given them, their life is great. And that was the argument that people who defended slavery, that was their exact argument, or people that defended segregation. So if the defense is, well, they just have to, they can be prosperous and they can be fine and we won't beat them and we won't hurt them. So as long as they do exactly what we say and just accept their measly life, it's not going to work out so well. So I don't want to subject you to any more of Netanyahu's speech. The thing that I found the most disgusting about it was he was treated like a rock star. He walks in there and they're standing ovations and they're clapping and like cheering for him like he's some sort of a rock star. He's, of course, paid for all of their campaigns. So for them, they do have a reason to cheer. They're so grateful that he's put those individual people into those positions of power rather than some challenger that they might have, some actual real American challenger in their hometowns. They instead are sitting in the seats of power in Washington, and it's all because of Netanyahu. So they treated him like a rock star. Another thing I found really disappointing was Elon Musk showed up to listen to Netanyahu's speech. He was asked who he was a guest of, and he said he was a guest of Netanyahu. You want to fuel conspiracy theories? It's just... there was Elon Musk allowing for a lot of free speech on X. He takes a pilgrimage trip to Israel and suddenly he flips on everything. As soon as they basically threaten ad revenue on his platform, he's suddenly kowtowing like this. And then we're not allowed to say, oh, the Jews control everything, right? When you see something like that, you're like, well, okay, we're not allowed to say that. But then here's Elon Musk showing up as a guest of Netanyahu, and he's like completely flipped his tune, and he's the world's #1 billionaire. What in the world is going on? So those are the types of optics that I don't think are very helpful. I don't know why Elon Musk needed to go and do that. I wish he wouldn't have. I wish, there's a lot of things I wish about all of this, but anyway, I'm not going to subject you to any more of it. It was just tragic that he was invited. This is a dark day in American history. It's a dark day that these American citizens and politicians are supporting Netanyahu. These people will be looked at unkindly in the history books, maybe not in our lifetimes, but certainly at some point in the future. They're not going to be remembered kindly. That is for sure. Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.